book of Hosea that God desires to show his amazing, unfailing love toward Israel, while at the same time expressing how hurtful it is to endure Israel's unfaithfulness. And in these first 3 chapters, we're seeing that God is using Hosea as a picture book. And this 3rd chapter is the final picture before the prophecies unfold. But God's wanting to get his people and ultimately the world to truly see the kind of relationship that God desires to have with his people. And so as God pictures this relationship with his people as a marriage, as he commands Hosea to marry a promiscuous woman and have children of promiscuity, and what God is showing is that here is this relationship, and it's like a bad marriage. Here is Israel who continues to be unfaithful toward God. And so now as we enter into Hosea chapter 3, what God is going to do in this final picture through Hosea, I think is perhaps the most mind-blowing of the 3 chapters. And it's a short chapter, and yet absolutely staggering in giving us this final picture of how much God loves his people. You'll notice the beginning of chapter 3 in verse 1. And the Lord said to me, "Go again, love a woman who was loved by another man and is an adulteress, even as the Lord loves the children of Israel, though they turn to other gods and love cakes of raisins." So what an interesting beginning is. Here is God saying, now here's what I want you to do. I want you to love this woman who is loved by another man and is an adulteress. I want you to love her again. And now we haven't seen this anywhere in the narrative up to this point, but we are left with the picture that Gomer, Hosea's wife, has left Hosea and is now with somebody else. And now here is God coming to Hosea and saying, now what I want you to do is I want you to love her again, even though she's left you, even though she's an adulteress, even though she is loved by another man. What I want you to do is I want you to go and I want you to love her again. And I think this is so interesting because if you think about this situation, what would a human do in this situation? Think about what we would do if you had a spouse who just said, I don't want to be with you. I'm not going to be faithful to you. I'm not going to stay with you. There's somebody else I want to be with, and I'm going to be with them. Now, our reaction would be, okay, well, the marriage is done. It's over. She refuses to be faithful to me. She refuses to stay with me. And here Hosea would have every right to put Gomer away for her infidelity. And yet, notice what God is trying to picture is a staggering bit of love. To love her again, and to love her in spite of her unfaithfulness. Because you ask the question, well, why would Hosea have to do this? God, why are you making Hosea go marry this, bring this woman back and love her again and be joined to her again? And notice the reason is given in verse 1. I want you to go love a woman who is loved by another man, an adulteress, even as the Lord loves the children of Israel. I want you to love them again because that's what God is doing toward Israel. Even though Israel has been unfaithful, even though Israel does not love God, doesn't have any interest in fidelity with God, has no interest in serving God, has nothing in wanting to be in relationship with God in the slightest, and yet God says, I still love these people. I still want a relationship with them. And so Hosea, I want you to picture this. Just as I love Israel, so I want you to love Gomer again. I want you to love her yet again. And perhaps the most staggering part of all of this is the rest of verse 1. Even as the Lord loves the children of Israel, though they turn to other gods and love cakes of raisins. Anyway, now what exactly are they doing with that? Raisin cakes was part of the idolatrous worship. And it appears that Israel really enjoyed those raisin cakes. And notice that's the idea, is not only is Israel involved in all of this idolatry, and they love these other gods, and they're far more interested in worshiping them rather than loving the true and living God. But more than that, they are trading God's love for loving raisin cakes. That's what they enjoy. That's what they like. That's what they want to spend their time with. They want false gods and the raisin cakes that come with them. And I just think it is so interesting, the picture that is given to us, because when we read that, surely all of our minds think, what a silly thing to do. Why would you love raisin cakes rather than the true and living God? Why would you be so fascinated by the foods that are given to the idols, and that would be your sole desire, and why you want to worship these gods is for that satisfaction rather than the true and living God? How silly to do that. Who would be so foolish to choose trivial, temporary things of this earth rather than the love of the true and living God? Every human would, is the answer to that. Every single person does. And what looks silly to us in terms of raisin cakes is ultimately the same thing we do. That we would just simply ask ourselves, well, what are the raisin cakes that we're trading God out for? What are we so interested in? And so often it is a long list of things that we trade God for, that we trade God for money and possessions and recreation, comfort, sex, whatever it is. We are always choosing these temporary, silly, trivial things and rejecting the love of God in the process. And just to be astounded by the fact that here is God saying, even though they reject me for these trivial raisin cakes, I still love them. I still want a relationship with them. I still love them so much that, Hosea, I want you to picture this to Israel. And even though Gomer's completely rejected you and she is loved by another and is in the midst of adultery, I want you to love her again. And ultimately, I think what is also beautiful about this picture and what God tells Hosea to do is it becomes a model later on in the New Testament, where God comes along and describes in Ephesians chapter 5 in the picture of marriage. He says, husbands, I want you to love your wives like Christ loved the church. And we have to fill that picture strongly to recognize what a big picture that is. Here is God loving Israel. And Israel doesn't want anything to do with him. And showing here that God would be faithful to his part of the covenant. He would remain faithful to his end, even though Israel is completely unfaithful toward him. And this is what God is telling Hosea to do. Even though Gomer has been unfaithful to you, you still be faithful to her. And so a beautiful picture of what marriage looks like in loving the way God loves. And so notice that in verse 2, we're presented a little bit more information. Verse 2 says, so I bought her for 15 shekels of silver and an omer and a lekek of barley. Now, we aren't told what happened here either. We are left to fill in the gaps and simply told, for somehow, some way, Hosea's wife has been enslaved and now has been put up for sale. We don't know if it's through her escapades that she's been involved in as she's left Hosea and that has put her into slavery, or whether when she went to this other man and spent time with him and now he is done with her and has gotten rid of her and now she's being sold off. Whatever the reason is, we aren't told. But she is now up for sale. And the price is set here at 15 shekels of silver and basically some barley. That's the cost that is put for this woman. And I want us to think about the staggering nature of even this command, of what God is calling for Hosea to do. That she had left Hosea for another lover. And now how crazy it is that Hosea has to buy back his own wife. This is his own wife. And yet, go and pay the money, pay the price, and buy her back. And I think it is just so interesting that Hosea does this, and this is exactly what God has to do for his people. We already belong to God. He created us, he called us to himself, and then yet we reject him. We go after our own desires. We do what we want to do. We choose our raisin cakes rather than the love of God. We all stray completely away from him. We've sold ourselves into the power of sin. We've given ourselves over to the flesh. We've chased after the pursuits of this world. We're completely enslaved and have no way to release ourselves. And what does God do? He buys us back. This is the picture why you see this picture all over the New Testament. Titus chapter 2, verse 14, and speaking of Jesus, he gave himself for us to redeem us from all lawlessness and to cleanse for himself a people of his own possession, eager to do good works. This redeem word means to buy back. He bought us back out of all of our lawlessness and sinfulness to cleanse us. Why? To belong back to him, to be his people. Same thing in 1 Peter 1:18. For you know that you were redeemed from your empty way of life, inherited from your fathers, not with perishable things like silver and gold, but with the precious blood of Christ, like that of an unblemished and spotless lamb. Notice the New Testament saying, do you understand how much God had to pay to buy you back? It wasn't 15 shekels and some barley. It is the precious blood of Christ that was the cost. And what is being already modeled right here is God is going to have to redeem his people. His people have enslaved themselves because of their sins, and God is going to pay a high price to be able to redeem his people and bring them back. This is what Paul is doing in Romans chapter 5, verse 6. While we were still helpless, at the right time Christ died for the ungodly. Not while we were still in a good condition and while we were righteous, but when we are a total mess, God comes in at the right time. He dies for the ungodly, for rarely will someone die for a just person, though for a good person, perhaps someone might even dare to die. But God proves his love for us, and that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. What God is trying to picture through Hosea is not only the picture of Israel, the unfaithfulness of Israel to him, and God's love to Israel, but ultimately becomes the model of the world's rejection of God and how God loves the whole world. And so in Christ we're seeing that picture given. And so here is the command in verse 2, I want you to go buy her. And so he does in verse 2, he buys her for this price. Now look at verse 3. And I said to her, you must dwell as mine for many days. You shall not play the whore or belong to another man. So will I also be to you. Now I want you to think about this. Hosea has a simple and fairly obvious request now. Be faithful. All right, you've gone off your ways. You've given yourself over to these other lovers. And now you've enslaved yourself, and I have paid a price to buy you back to me. Simple request. Now stay faithful to me. And I'd just like to ask, does that seem like an unreasonable request? Does that seem unfair? I mean, that's a natural request, right? That seems like obvious. It's almost like, Hosea, do you even have to say that? Of course, that would be the expectation, wouldn't it? It should have been the expectation in the first place. She's your wife. Of course she should be faithful to you, but how much all the more where Hosea can say,
Now I bought you back. You belong to me. Be my wife. You must dwell with me now many days, not these other lovers, not these other people. Don't belong to another man, and I will be faithful to you. I'll be faithful to you, you be faithful to me. And again, just think about how the New Testament does this very thing as well. 1 Corinthians chapter 6:19, you are not your own, for you were bought with a price, to glorify God in your body. This is such an important declaration about what God is asking of us. When we boil down the idea of loving Jesus and following him into simply do not sin, we are really missing the point. Because that's not really ultimately what the call is. The call is not just stop sinning. God's call is this: I love you. Even when you ran away from me and you sold yourself, and I came and I bought you back. And now I want you to remain faithful to me because I bought you back. That's the gospel. You wrecked yourself. I came and purchased you. I rescued you. Now be faithful to me. Notice that's the essence of what Paul is saying. What should you do since you're not your own and you were bought with a price? Be faithful to God. Glorify God with your body. That is the call that is given to us as well. Final picture now in verses 4 and 5, because now here's what this is going to look like. Now we get some prophetic angle here to see that this isn't just simply Hosea and Gomer. This is a very big picture. Verse 4. For the children of Israel shall dwell many days without king or prince, without sacrifice or pillar, without ephod or household gods. Afterward, the children of Israel shall return and seek the Lord their God and David their king. And they shall come in fear to the Lord and to his goodness in the latter days. So notice what God says. Here's what I'm going to do. Verse 4, here's what I'm going to do to the people of Israel. I'm going to purge them. I'm going to cleanse them from these idols. I'm going to purge them of these worldly desires. And you notice these images are going to be without sacrifice, pillar, without ephod, household gods. There's going to be a purging that's going to happen. I'm going to strip all of these false loves, strip all of these false securities away from Israel. And that's ultimately the judgments that were about to befall them, that the rest of Hosea is going to talk about, that we'll get to look at over the next few weeks. But I just want you to think about the picture of why God says he's doing this. Because after he describes that he is going to take away the ephod and pillar and be without these sacrifices and household gods and deal with this idolatry and these false trusts, he says, what's going to happen in verse 5? Then they'll return. And this is how God operates, that what God does is he is going to essentially deconstruct his people so that they will turn and they will follow him and they will seek him. And we see God trying to give us this warning and this picture over and over again. That what God does is he comes in and he will not allow our lives to just go swimmingly along so that we end up taking our life into disaster. That what God is doing is trying to shake us up, to awaken us, so that we would recognize that we need to make changes so that we will return and follow him. That God is trying to rip these idols out of our hearts, to try to deconstruct us in such a way so that we would open our eyes and see how much we need God. This is one of the pictures that we'll see in the book of Hosea, where God is going to say, I'm going to take away blessings and I'm going to take away all kinds of things with this intention to try to wake you up. I'm going to allow things to happen to Israel so that they would understand that they're going the wrong way. And that this would kind of be the light bulb moment for them, so that they would awaken themselves and see that they need to change their ways and that they would come back to God. And ultimately, this is the mercy and grace of God. And you see Peter telling us our faith needs to be refined. I hate that as much as you do. How many times the scriptures tell us faith is going to be tried and tested and refined, And we need that to happen. Peter puts it in a picture of the faith that needs to be refined so that it can be purified and be as precious as it needs to be. And that's why we go through difficulties and trials and suffering, why God allows those things. This was the argument the writer of Hebrews made in chapter 12 that we looked at a few weeks ago, that God out of his love is training and teaching and disciplining and doing these things because we need that. Imagine what a terrible father it would be to have a child that is disobedient and out of control, and the father does absolutely nothing. Something has to happen. And think about how awful it would be of God if he allowed us to just do whatever we wanted to do, just completely go our own way, and then we get before God on the day of judgment and go, I had no idea that I was lacking in all of these areas. What we see God doing is using these life events to turn our hearts back to him, essentially to awaken us. Because there is no better way to see weaknesses and failures in faith than by going through suffering. It is an amazing tool that God has for us, that we go through such things. And you may think you have self-control, and then you go through a trial and you think, oh, well, maybe not. Or you think, no, I've got anger under control, and you go, well, maybe not. Or I have patience. Or you just pick any of the fruit of the Spirit, those different things, and just go through something really hard, and suddenly you'll realize, oh, yeah, I don't depend upon God like I thought. Oh, that is a blind spot. That is a weak area of my faith. This is what God is doing, and this is what God is saying here. Since I'm bringing you back, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to awaken your senses and help you see your failures so that, verse 5, you will come to the Lord and seek him. You will desire him, and you will come in the fear of the Lord and the goodness in these latter days. I'm going to cause that to happen to you. I'm going to let this purging occur. If we had time for a whole side sermon, you'd go to the New Testament and go, this was the whole idea of why the apostles will talk about there would be a remnant, is that a purging of Israel is going to occur here. And we are going to find who are truly belonging to God or not. Verse 5 also speaks of a messianic hope. How amazing is it that it says that they're going to return and seek the Lord their God and David their king. Now, Hosea is long, long past David, about 300 some years past David at this point. And yet, here is a prophecy that afterward, in latter days, Israel's going to seek God, and they're going to come to David. A messianic hope is given to these people who have turned so far away from God. There is going to be a Messiah who will arrive. There will be the anointed king who is going to rescue. And when he comes, he's going to change the people's hearts. And he's going to cause hearts to change and lives to change so that they would be followers of God. That's the whole story of the entrance of Christ in the New Testament, is he comes on the scene, and there are people who are glad to see him and receive him, and there are people who are still like in Hosea's day, who have hard, stubborn hearts and are still more interested in raisin cakes than serving the true and living God. And so then I think as we talk about this picture, just a single application that you see in this amazing image of God's redeeming love, I hope one of the things that we really become aware of in chapter 3 particularly, but really in all three of those chapters, is just really soak in the weight of what God is trying to provide for us in this picture. Because ultimately what God is saying is that we are in a marriage to God, and not only are we in a marriage to God, let these words sink in. We are the ones who are responsible for the marriage being bad. We are the ones who've wrecked the covenant. We are the ones who have failed God. God is not the problem. We are. That is God's message again and again and again. God is not the point of failure. We are. And so often what we want to do is blame God, and God is saying, I'm not the problem here. I have been faithful to you. I love you. Look at all that I've done for you. You are the reason why this relationship is bad, not God. And so we need to hear that we are the problem. We are the ones who are unfaithful. We have enslaved ourselves. We have wandered far from God. We are the ones who love other people and other things. We are the ones who have loved this world. And I hope that you'll hear what God has said in all of this. Ultimately, what it means when we go from God and we love our sins and we love the world and we love our stuff and we love our raisin cakes is that we have betrayed God. That's ultimately what that is God is saying this is betrayal. That this is a marriage covenant and you have other lovers. You love other things. You would rather be in those things than with God. And it's so important that we challenge ourselves with that question. Is that true of us? Are there other things we would much rather be doing than the things of God? Would we rather spend time in God's things and spiritual things, in His Word, in prayer, in meditating, in Bible study? Are those things the things that we truly get our joy and satisfaction out of? Or is it really the raisin cakes of the world? The things that are temporary, trivial, and ultimately not important to anything in regards to our eternity. We've betrayed God. And I hope that we would just think about, like the people of Israel, like what was been pictured in these 3 chapters, we have wrecked our lives, we've wrecked ourselves, we've run far from God. And I was trying to quantify a way to say this, so I thought this is probably not a big enough number, but God ultimately has 100 million reasons to divorce us, doesn't He? How many times have we run from God? How many different reasons does God have of why He does not need to be faithful anymore to the covenant? Why He could say, listen, you obviously don't want to be with me. You obviously don't love me. You obviously don't want to be a part of this relationship. And so the deal's over. It's over. And here's what should be the staggering thing. Is even though God has more than 100 million reasons to divorce us, He doesn't. And to say it even stronger, He doesn't give up on you. How fair would it be for God to just come to chapter 3 and go, we were married, you ran away, so you, and that's fair. We'd read that story and go, sure is. That's fair. But what God does is He says, I have 100 million reasons to divorce you, and I'm not going to do that. And let me prove to you that I haven't given up on you. He sends His Son to die on a cross, to be the price to set us free from what we enslaved ourselves to finally be able to break free of the curse of sin, to buy us back. And I think it is so fascinating. He doesn't buy us back out of revenge or judgment or punishment. The text tells us He buys us out of love. That's how badly He wants to be with us. He loves us even though we rejected Him. He goes out and buys us with the blood of His Son through the cross of Christ to try to demonstrate how much He loves us. And then even still, we can be challenged to understand the depth of God's love for us. And after God does all of this, ultimately there's just one thing God says. We're married, we're in a covenant, you ran away, I bought you back, Now be faithful to me, and I'll be faithful to you. That's God's call. That's all God is calling for the world, is you've destroyed yourself, you've wrecked your lives, you've loved everything but me, and I still love you. And I want you so badly with me that I'll give up my own son so that you can be with me. And I just ask one thing from you. I just ask you to be faithful. I ask you to stop going after those other loves. I ask you to stop chasing those other desires. I ask you to stop betraying me and be faithful to the covenant that I've given to you. God's goal in that is simply this: that his love would be so strong, that we would see how strong that love is to such a degree that it would change our hearts so that we would look at the raisin cakes and see them as silly and worthless and unimportant and not worth the trade that we are making. God pursues us, God heals us, God helps us, and God restores us. And his simple call now is, will you stay? Let's go to God in prayer. Our dear God, I just don't even know the words to say to express how to understand this love that you have for us. It is certainly beyond human love that you would continue to love people who continue to turn their back on you day in and day out, over and over again, who let you down, who fail you, who break your covenant, who love so many other things than you. And rather than us receiving what we ought to receive for that, show us mercy and grace through the cross of your Son. No wonder the Apostle Paul cried out of the depths and the riches of your mercy and love. God, we pray that we would appreciate the love that you have shown us. We pray that we would appreciate the price that you paid. That we'd appreciate how much you desire to be in a relationship with us. We pray that our hearts would be changed from desiring the things of this world to loving you with all of our heart. And Lord, it's a hard thing to say, but we need it. When we're straying away from you, please put us back on the right track. Wake us up. Move things in our lives so that we would see that we are not moving toward you as we ought. Help us see the false loves of this world that we have. Help us see the things that we have trusted in. Help us to observe the raisin cakes that are pulling our hearts so that we can get rid of those things before it's too late. God, thank you for your long suffering. Thank you for the amazing patience you have shown this world. For as long as this world has existed, people have resisted you, rebelled against you, and hated you. And yet you keep the world spinning because you love us that much. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your love. Thank you for your mercy. In Jesus' name.
Amen.
We sing the invitation song. We invite you to come to Jesus. I hope you see what God has done. It's just staggering what God has done. He flies in the face of all human logic and reason. No human would probably show this kind of love that God does. It's the point of Romans 5. We wouldn't die for a righteous person, and God died for sinners. Will you love him back and be faithful to Him. We want to help you in any way that we can. If there's anything we can do for you, won't you come now while we stand and raise?